Well, welcome everyone. I'm Jim Boomer, CEO of Boomer Consulting, and I'd like to welcome you all to today's webinar, The Role Technology Plays in Your 2023 M&A Strategy. I'm joined today by an amazing panel who I will introduce here in a moment. Just before we get started, a few housekeeping items, and then we'll get off and running. So first off, we will be offering CPE credit for today's webinar. In order to get CPE, you'll need to participate in all 3 polling questions and complete the survey that will be sent out later today. Second, we will be recording today's webinar, and that will be sent out in a follow-up later today, as well as a copy of the PowerPoint slides and any handouts. Please utilize the closed caption feature in the Zoom menu below if needed. And then finally, we'll be happy to entertain questions. Since you're muted, just please use the Q&A feature of Zoom. So just if you have a question, type it in there. We'll keep an eye on that. If it's in the flow of our conversation, we'll address it there. If not, we'll hold it to the end. And in the event we don't get to your question, we'll make sure that somebody follows up with you at the conclusion of today's webinar. So just a few introductory comments before we get started to set the stage. So today we're here to discuss mergers and acquisition and really the role of technology on the experience. A lot of firms struggle with understanding when and how to bring the technology plan and leadership into the life cycle and the impact that has on the success of the transaction. So we've broken our discussion into really 3 parts in order to explore each of the stages with our panel of experts here. So for part 1, will be on acquisition selection and due diligence, part 2, onboarding, and then the final part, post onboarding. So now I'd like to welcome our panelists for today. I want to thank you for joining me, and I'm excited for the discussion. I'll let each of you introduce yourself here in a moment, but I'm joined by Bob Fink, IT partner and CIO at Honkamp. Also, Gary Thomson, managing partner at Thomson Consulting. And last but not least, Kate Krupey, VP of Fintech at Netgain Technology. So welcome all of you. I will be the moderator for today's panel discussion. And let's get things started with just a quick round of intros. So Bob, you want to kick us off?
Sure. Bob Fink. I am the CIO at Honkamp. I've been with the firm about 17 years. And I think relating to this topic, I think just hit our 10th acquisition we've done over my tenure. So, and I've been part of Honkamp from being help desk to the CIO. So I've seen each level and have been involved at each level that as part of the acquisitions.
All right, great. Well, just a tad bit of experience then, huh? All right, Gary.
Yeah, Jim, thank you. My name is Gary Thomson, and with Thomson Consulting, my own management consulting practice. I spent 34 years in public accounting as a leader, as someone who started his own practice and did a lot of M&A work in my career. And then for the last 3.5 years, I've had a consulting practice advising organizations, firms around practice management and M&A. So it's great to join this great panel today. Thank you.
All right, and Kate.
Yes, thanks, Jim. So I'm Kate Krupey. I am the VP of Fintech for Netgain Technology. We are a managed service provider for the CPA vertical. My background is I came up through a firm as a CIO for 10 years before jumping over to the provider side. And we help firms with all sorts of things, including M&A activity and helping them through that process, which we'll talk more about today.
All right, perfect. Well, happy to have all of you here, and again, excited for the conversation. Before I jump into my first question, though, we will, when I'm already behind slides, but we'll do a CPE question. So our first question, and if we can go ahead and launch the first polling question. So is your firm looking at inorganic options to accelerate growth? M&A opportunity. So yes, we are actively seeking to acquire or are currently in the acquisition process. Yes, we will be pursuing that in 23, maybe, not quite decided, or D, I'm not sure. So we'll give it a minute here. Again, a reminder for CPE, you'll need to answer all 3 of the questions, but we'll let these answers come in. And while we do that, I will stop sharing because most of this is going to be an interactive discussion. And we'll pop the slides back on our next polling question. So with that, we are at about 68%. So we'll give it just another, there we go. All right. So it looks like 9% are actively seeking to acquire or in the process. Another 18% are will be pursuing it in 23, and then 18% at maybe, and about a little over half of you are not sure. So, all right, well, let's get into our first question today. So, Bob, I'm going to start with you on this one, and then Kate and Gary, we'll come to you to add on. So, in the M&A process, what role does technology strategy play, and what is the role of internal IT within the firm going through the process?
Sure. And on this one, I'll of course speak on what it looks like for us, and then try to generalize a bit too. For us, with doing as many as we've had, we've really brought IT up further and further into the process, to the point now that myself and our infrastructure manager are part of the M&A team. That team consists of other leaders from marketing to operations to finance, to help round out how we move in and help take care of whoever we are acquiring. With that, we know well ahead of time of, at least, especially real early, general area, firm size. As soon as we start moving into, we're looking at getting that letter of an intent signed and really moving forward, especially moving into due diligence. We're usually provided full details of what we're looking at, especially with timing. That way IT can prioritize our projects, work around it, and then make sure that the big part is making sure IT does not have vacation scheduled around that acquisition date, to make sure we're all here to put everybody ready to go to help them out. We really get to the due diligence process. Most of the time we've done smaller acquisitions of 10 employees or smaller. We've done a couple bigger ones, but when we do ours, from a firm perspective, I think really the only showstopper that we've got on our list for the most part, especially these smaller firms, is, have you had a security incident in the past? That's one of the biggest ones we ask from an IT perspective, especially for a smaller firm, is there something that we're going to uncover after the fact that could be a detriment to the rest of the firm? Thankfully, that hasn't come up yet, but I do speak of when we kind of roll into that, is if I only get one thing answered, which it's not, but if I only get one question to go in, that's my question. The other big thing we do is get, as comprehensive of a software and hardware inventory as possible. Honestly, any more software is more important, because that helps us really map out what we need to do and when we need to do it. So due diligence for us, we get a lot of that just to look at firm synergies, but also knowing that really helps turn into planning phase pretty quick, because really our due diligence process is good, but half of that actually just turns into planning. That a lot of that info you get back, we get to run with and really lay out what's looking at us in the coming months usually. Like I said, most of them have been 10 employees or less. That's what we just did 2 in the last month. Both of those at the same time, 10 or less. As they get bigger, say a 30-person, 35 that we've done in the past, your project planning, your laying out timelines becomes, way more important, especially digging into their technology, because they likely have more. Is what we've seen. The bigger the firm, the more tech that's behind it. You just have more to do, more to get your arms around. And certain things like, is it all in-house? Do they have their own data center? Is it hosted somewhere? Sometimes we've seen it where it's hosted, it's a nightmare to get it out. So that really helps give the acquisition, their employees and, usually the partner in charges, an idea of what's actually going to happen when. because those conversations happen real quick early on, especially as a lot of these happen November, December, and you're rolling over to tax planning and getting ready for tax season. And there's a lot on their plate and a lot of ours. So being able to get some of those key details up front really starts laying out that timeline for them.
Great. Thanks, Bob. Yeah, having that inventory and knowing what lies ahead of you, not just in terms of a system software implementation, but also the change management process and what all is going to be involved there too. So thank you. All right, Kate, I'm going to go to you. Anything you'd add on top of Bob's answer?
Sure, I'd say that something I hear from our clients that is a surprise to look out for is when they're working on data conversion, even if it's data conversion from same systems, that generally they need to get the vendor involved and that there is sometimes a wait list for that. So as you're starting to look at the planning process, that's something to get ahead of. Aside from that, obviously, just, the folks who we see are successful are the people who bring IT in early. So the sooner the better. And some firms feel, some of our clients feel as though they have to wait till they get that letter of intent, and it depends on what the trust factor is between their leader in IT and the leadership of the firm. But as they get over that hump, especially if M&A strategy is a big growth strategy for them and they're going to be doing this multiple times a year, it doesn't take long to learn. The earlier you bring IT in, the better. There's just an awful lot of things that we need to do in IT that firm leadership may or may not be aware of. So as we're putting all of those pieces together, the sooner the better. That said, some firms also get pretty good at, being ready to jump as soon as possible, right? Because they're just not going to find out until that letter of intent is signed. And so even if you are on the IT side of the house and you're not yet at that table where you're talking during the planning stages, you can still do an awful lot of planning that'll help you be successful once you hit the ground.
All right, thank you, Kate. Now I will second your advice to get IT, as much of your operations people, involved early. Bob, you and Kate, in your prior life, you were both involved in our CIO circle discussions, and we've heard the good where the planning, what time was left and what happened was a positive outcome. And we've also heard the nightmare stories where that wasn't done. So, all right, thanks, Kate. How about you, Gary? You're probably coming at this from a little bit different perspective. I'd love to hear your thoughts.
Yeah, thanks, Jim. And I will come at a different but complementary perspective to what Bob and Kate have already said. So I can listen to the two of them and almost chuckle for some of the mistakes that I made early in my M&A career as a firm leader, in that we do, as firms and as firm leaders, take different view of when due diligence does or doesn't start. This whole concept of an LOI, letter of intent, has been mentioned a couple of times today. But inadvertently, and I think this is more historical, but it's still prevalent to some extent today, we thought of those early stage discussions as something so secretive and so confidential that we kept it within the constraints of an executive committee or maybe a managing partner or a small group that may be an M&A committee within a firm. And in that context, oftentimes we do so much due diligence behind the curtain that by the time we're ready to sign an LOI, we think the deal's done, and then we bring in IT. Well, of course, we all know on this panel that not only has that evolved, but that's a mistake to think of it that way. That particularly in this technological age and the evolution of technology over the last 3.5 years is dizzying, that the best firms are thinking of this different. As an example, I worked with a firm recently where the CIO made it known, like, I want to be involved in M&A strategy, not just waiting for the opportunities to come along, but to be one of the thought partners that's at the table. And her involvement as a CIO was just incredibly beneficial to a number. Some that we said no to, some that we said yes to. So, part of the conversation I had with her kind of afterwards, learning a little bit, tell me how you got to the place that you were included at the table sooner rather than later. And her comment was, I really studied hard to know the profession. I wanted to understand what was going on beyond my firm. So she showed a lot of natural curiosity. Secondly, she really made herself known within the firm and firm's leadership that I'm someone that's just not a CIO that's concerned about the technology. I really have an interest in the success of our firm and want to know more about M&A strategy. And Jim, a little to the point that you made earlier, so that we are ready no matter what comes along. Because let's face it, some of these opportunities come along through a long plan process, and we meet and we talk a lot. Others come through just kind of surreptitiously, and we're like, okay, we need to respond quickly to this. And so she had made herself ready and available and had developed processes. So I think this curiosity that's important, but also this becoming known within your firm is, I'm not just a technology leader, I'm a thought leader. So when I see firms that benefit in that way, I see firms that are much more successful. So kind of wearing that leader hat, thinking about our technology folks, whatever the titles may be within the respective organizations, but thinking of them as important players, even when we're going through whatever our internal processes may be. So I find a lot of success when that occurs, Jim.
Yep. Well, and your first point on the secretive, it is a balancing act because you're exploring deals left and right, and you don't want to infuse unnecessary chaos or disruption and chatter and rumors until you're to that point. So it goes back to curiosity, but also building the trust among that executive team that you can be trusted with things that are confidential, and then showing the value that it delivers when they get you involved early. Sorry, Kate, I think I cut you off.
It's a big transition for many firms when the CIO or the IT leader knows about potential mergers before many of the partners do. And kind of to that challenge around balancing, the word that you use, balancing confidentiality with inclusion of the right people to get to that point. So you're right on target with that, Jim.
So we talk about trust in the IT leadership circles a lot. And it's funny, from our side of the desk, there is that trust building that a firm has to go through with their IT leadership. But when you sit on our side of the desk, if I say Bob's side of the desk, there is so much that IT is responsible for securing. There is so much that you already trust us with, or the firm already trusts us with. Being able to articulate that, I think, is really helpful. And that also brings up another thought, which is about security. When you're onboarding, as Bob had mentioned, one of the big concerns when you're onboarding a new firm is, are they bringing any risk with them in their data set? And we can ask the questions about, have you had any incidents? Have you had any issues? But sometimes they don't even know. And we can even do our due diligence of scanning, but we may not find everything. So here's a good reason to bring your IT leader in early, just to plan the security piece, to figure out, do you need to create, and this is one of the things that we work with our clients on, do you need to create a safe space to bring those systems and data in while you're trying to sort that out? So really, again, all around trust. And I think it's being able to articulate what it is we do for the firms, I think makes it a little easier for leadership to start to see how that works.
Mm-hmm. I add to that real quick. Kind of both of you mentioned some good points. Of Gary, I know we talked previously of, I think you hit two different points to make this hit home with me, of kind of that trust factor, but also where IT is anymore with accounting firms from an operational standpoint, that we seem to be more of my job anymore is automation and working with the firm on efficiencies, that we're so entwined that we just did 2 acquisitions, and I got the question from the executive team of, it was up to me, can we do 2 on the same date? And I know I got caught off guard getting that question. It didn't shock me after, but it was like, it's come a long way from finding out with 2 weeks prior that, oh yeah, by the way, we're doing this, to 2 months ahead of time of, hey, can we pull 2 off at the same time? So it's been great, because I'm right in the room with, we're planning out the training schedule, what's going when. We're laying out, trying to get them the information of, okay, what do they expect week 1? We really go in and we'll put them on Office 365. So they're on our email, Teams, get to SharePoint so they can find the firm resources that are there, and time and billing. That's our core. That happens week 1 or week 2. The rest of it, depending on timing, we figure out later. We work with them. We really like the fact that we're now usually these last 2, we did a month notice to both the employees and clients. And that lets us get to the staff level and really figure out their processes and what they're using to lay out a better schedule of what's priority, depending on what month the acquisition happens. You might have quarterly things that happen the next week. You've got payrolls. Getting all that on the list and hearing it from the staff of what their priorities are help us tremendously being able to lay out what has to be live day 1, day 2, week 3. You kind of lay that out, and it gives them a comfort level too of what should they expect? What are we going to do to make sure that they're good? Knowing that we're in the boat completely with them, I think is a big thing to make sure that they understand is we literally stop pretty much every other project IT wise. Yes, there's other stuff going on, but we tell the firm there's no priorities other than acquisition around those dates. So we make sure the staff of the acquisitions know that of you need me as the CIO, I'm personally here for you so that whatever comes up, we try to make it as smooth as possible. Because it's not going to go perfect, but when you're both in the same boat working on it, it goes a heck of a lot smoother.
All right. Well, thank you all. I imagine we could probably talk about just the due diligence piece of it for the full hour here, but I'm going to move us forward, and I'm going to make sure we get CPE question number 2 in here. So what is the involvement of your IT team in your firm's M&A process? So from the upfront planning, involved in execution, limited involvement, or it may vary. So just a reminder, we need you to complete all of the polling questions for CPE purposes, and we'll give it a little time here. And while we wait for those answers to come in, I'll set up the next section. So we were talking about the pre-merger, pre-acquisition. Now it's a go, and we're going to move to onboarding and culture and all of those fun things. So Gary, I'm gonna start with you after we look at what the answers were here. So going once, going twice. All right. So 38% have involved in upfront planning. 8% are involved in the execution. 8% are limited, and it may vary for about half of you. So it's kind of across the board. But I'll emphasize again: getting IT involved early is an important piece of success. So, Gary, here's my question: what are the key areas of focus to make a new acquisition onboarding process successful?
Kate and Bob, thank you for giving me the rest of the time, because the question Jim just gave me is going to take the next 30-some minutes. You can go ahead and get a Diet Coke and enjoy the rest of this. No, seriously, it's a great question. I'm going to start off with a phrase that we often hear, and that's first impressions are lasting impressions. While I don't completely buy into that, because we have opportunities to recover, there's no doubt that in this area, particularly as it relates to technologies and future thinking CPA firms, the impressions that individuals have about us and our technological integrations are important first impressions. The view that our clients have about where we are with relations to technology and how we communicate and relate to them are very, very important first impressions. I think if I took my shoes off and used my fingers, I would still need a few more hands and feet to count the number of mergers that I did when I was in practice. I think the number's about 40. But the one that was the most impactful was my last one, because for the first time, I merged up, Jim. And so it gave me a different perspective. But no matter what we say in our press releases or anything, usually there's a firm whose processes and technologies generally get adapted in a merger. It's a very practical and efficient way of doing things. So if we acknowledge that, we have to acknowledge that at any time there's a lot of nervous people. There's nervous staff individuals, there's nervous clients. What's this going to mean? We all know, particularly in our profession, since I'm a CPA, I can pick on myself a little bit. We're not necessarily known for our adaptability to change. And so there's a lot of nervousness there. So people's sensitivities and awareness about what's getting ready to happen are elevated. So our opportunity within technological integration is huge. If it goes really well, that makes everything else. Jim, you mentioned some of those points, culture as an example, leadership, going to market strategy, all those things become easier. So when I think of integration from a technology standpoint, I like to think of it through the lens of our customers, if I can call them that. And customers in this context are our people, internal resources, as well as our clients. I love to talk to firms in our profession about having optimism about the future. And what I like to say is that optimism is born out of clarity. Clarity doesn't mean they always agree with what you're getting ready to do or embrace every aspect of it, but at least they know what the plan is. And so when I think about technological adaptation and an integration into a merger, I think about, can we offer clarity? You know, what is it about our client delivery technology that will or won't change, and how are we ready for that? How about our practice management technology, which often gets in the way of just some fairly simple things when we onboard people, whether it be our payroll processes, whether it be the way that we go about time recording. How about now in this age of hybrid and remote work? I mean, what we do as it relates to technology around that sends a pretty strong message through our firms, where 4 or 5 years ago, we would say, oh, that's just a few people, but now that's a lot of people. So identifying how will our customers, in this case, usually our people, think about that. What about our protocols? You know, some of the protocols that get in the way. Two-factor authentication, why do I need that? What about security things that maybe a smaller firm wasn't as sensitive to? Perhaps you're merging into a firm that has a healthcare consulting group, and now your HIPAA requirements require different levels of technology, and firms may or may not understand, why are you causing me or asking me to do these things? So it really boils down to, at least in my view, about having a plan, offering clarity, and then doubling down on our communication. Look, here's what we know. One of my favorite books is called Golf is Not a Game of Perfect. I'm a golfer. And what you realize is that in golf, I can practice my swing in an isolated environment. I can do all the things I need to do to be ready for a round of golf. But when I go out to tee off, guess what's happened? 30-mile-an-hour winds. Or the fairway's firmer than I thought. The greens are faster than I thought. And all the practice, while it helped, didn't necessarily prepare me for some of the elements that I was going to face. And so in these mergers, particularly when it comes to technology, we need to be able to say, here's our plan. And when things go off the rails, which they will, we have the ability to quickly communicate and pivot. And I think that confidence that we earn through communication and planning allows us to have some mistakes. Same thing with our clients. Look, and maybe even more sensitively. So if it's been a small firm merging into a big firm, clients are already saying, do I fit? What's that look like? And then we roll out things that make us look super big, that make us look complicated and not quite as consumer friendly as the other firm was. So thinking through both from the people standpoint and client standpoint, what are those things that will or won't move the needle? Look, I could go on and on in this, but out of respect for the rest of the panelists, I'll stop and just say, I think it's a lot about communication and preparation for what those obstacles may be.
Yeah, great stuff. I'd agree 100%. Setting those expectations, the clarity you talked about, and it can't just be communication out of the gate. It's got to be ongoing and keeping that clarity up. So, all right, Bob, I'm going to go to you.
Yeah. Any notes I had, I think I'm just going to repeat a lot of what Gary said, but I mean, and just recently going through two of them, it is so important to, I make an effort to be in the room right up front. I'm in the room the day that we introduced to their staff at our firm. Years ago, I wasn't. And then they'd come back to me with a list of 30 questions that they asked in the meeting. And then again, they're walking out of the room without clarity. So I was sitting here smiling through the whole thing of like, yeah, we've done that and we've learned, thankfully. So a lot of does, you know, what comes up, their angst right up front. Technology is one of the bigger ones because that's probably where they're going to see the most change in their day-to-day. So we just try to be there, answer those questions up front. Like Gary said, of here's the ones that we absolutely know today. And like these last two, we did a 30-day heads up. So it was like, no, I will be in your office next week and we'll talk through the rest of those details. So it was nice to them going, nope. I pulled them into a conference room, was on site and said, you tell me your concerns. I'll tell you what I know, but there's a whole lot here of your firm that I don't know. And that's what's great, having those meetings ahead of time. to try to get out of, in front of as much as you can. In a lot of our circumstances, we are the bigger firm acquiring smaller firms. So there is a ton of angst. So as also being, here for 17 years, I know the culture, I'm ingrained in it. It's all pretty much I've ever known. So I also try to make sure the staff understand that too, of who our CEO is. We have a CEO transition at the end of the year. I talk about it. I know our next CEO, I've known her my entire career, and I knew her in college. So, I walk in and give them, the personality, or at least, a secondhand experience of what it's like working for those two. So they've heard it, because a lot of times through a course of a year, there's not that many opportunities that the CEO is going to be in front of them. They were, of course, first meeting, they see him again the first few months, but trying to give them we're not this big, huge firm with big, huge firm culture. This is who we are. We do flexible initiatives. If you need to leave for whatever goes on in life, that's part of our culture. So it's making sure that they understand that they don't think we're coming in some rigid and changing their day-to-day life from what they can or can't do, as long as, of course, technology is right there too, that both of them can be equally as scary, and try to pick up on that and make sure that they see that we're there for them personally, and not just, as employees, but at a personal level, that we do value them, want them there. And every single person, especially at a smaller firm, even one or two people leaving during those early transition stages is huge. It hurts the clients, it hurts the rest of the staff that are there. So trying to get in and meld the cultures up front and just being there for them, I find to be very important. And thankfully, our executive team has done a wonderful job that they are trying to feel that culture out beforehand, through the partner charges and who we meet with during due diligence. But, I've heard what, cultures don't match is what really hurts a lot of these acquisitions. And thankfully, I've been a part of a lot of the good ones that we find matches. And, we've luckily stayed regional too. So I think that's helped us, that I can do day trips and get to these offices and see them in person. And of course, video calls are nice and can see each other, but spending a day with them, I think, has a whole lot longer standing impact than, an hour or two video call.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I want to emphasize, we have to start with culture. And too often we start with financial gain or growth or some other goals, and how does it match up? Does it add another niche that we don't have, or we want to strengthen, or a service line we don't have? And you got it. I mean, we're all our organizations are made up of people, and we got to make sure we have that mesh. So I'll emphasize, it's got to start with culture, and you got to open things up as early as possible to the ops people to help you out. So, all right, Kate, I'll go to you.
Sure. So I will, to pick up on what Bob was saying about communication and sort of ongoing communication and staying available. One of the things to think about is different ways to communicate, right? So we do usually a pretty good job at the very upfront piece of these sorts of projects, but we may only be choosing one way of communicating. Bob was talking about getting in front of people. Obviously, there's other digital communication you'd be putting out. Just remembering that people learn in different ways. So making sure that that is available, where can they find what they need, whether you're using an intranet site or if you're using a Teams site or SharePoint site, that they know how to get to the people and maybe also to the repository of information, so that they can understand what they need to know, not only about their new environment, but also about the process. So we were working with a client who was acquired, and in the process, I was managing some of the transitional pieces on their behalf. And I'm on a call, and the managing partner says to the acquiring firm, okay, so I understand all this stuff is happening, but we are really in the middle of a very busy time. My question is, how long do I have my laptop? And when do I get the laptop you're going to be sending me? And what does that mean in terms of what systems, do I keep using my tax application? When do I start using your tax application? And I just thought, oh my gosh, if the managing partner doesn't know the answer to these questions imagine what that experience is like for his staff, who doesn't have the probably communication avenues to ask those questions. And And then think about what that experience is like. Here's this, newly acquired firm that you're trying to put your arms around and really make feel welcome. And they're clearly in a panic situation. And really it's very simple communication over pieces that someone is planning, right? It is being planned, just not being communicated enough in enough different ways. So really I would say that is just to Gary and Bob both, really communication is what it's all about, and client experience, or end user experience in this case would be our clients.
Yep. Yeah. Well, and I'd add on to that, Kate. I agree 100%. Like, not everybody consumes information the same way. And I think about that, having an effective communication plan, and for firm leadership, that's probably, it's not easy, but it's not totally terrifying. Whereas you talk to a lot of IT professionals and it's like, you need to do effective communication, and it's just not their unique ability. So what I would encourage is tap into the other resources within your organization that are very good at it, whether that's marketing, whether you have a PR communications professional, they can help you. And so don't feel like you have to go at it alone, and working hand in glove with the overall firm leadership will make sure you're having a consistent message as well.
I think you're bringing up a great point about using your firm's marketing team. I learned that too late in my career in rolling out technology. Gary was saying earlier how he thought about some of his early deals and things that he missed, and now that he knows what he knows now, and learning about marketing and how you can use that internally, not just externally, in terms of rolling out any kind of technology is really powerful, but especially in these situations where you're bringing in new people.
Mm-hmm. All right, well, I'm going to move us along. Again, this is another section. Gary, you said it, we could talk, you said an hour, but I think we could spend more time than that. So let's go into part 3, which is the ongoing success and sort of the return on investment. So Kate, I'm gonna start with you here. Yeah. So what factors enable the ongoing success of an acquisition once the initial onboarding activities are complete?
So I'm going to focus again on how you are enabling that end user experience to be better than what it was before, right? So we all know that when we bring any new staff member on in any manner, that they get a barrage of training in their first couple of days, right? And they don't even know which end is up. So the continuation of that communication is going to lead to a much better experience. So I always recommend this for any kind of training, that you come back a month later and 2 months later, and that there's a place that they can, a very fast, direct place that they can get their questions answered. But then as a technologist, I also think highlighting any of the advantages that the acquiring firm has. If you've got more automation, if you've got a better processes around some of what you're doing, if there are things that are innovative about your firm that are exciting, just sharing that, even if that staff member can't be directly involved in it yet. So creating that sort of excitement around technology and what you're doing well, I think, helps that culture and helps bring that person in, and also helps if you can give the person the why of the change. That's always what we're looking for, right? And if you happen to have some great stuff going on in your firm, that's part of the why of the change. Why am I going from this tax application to this tax application? Or why am I going from this, practice management system to this practice? Or why are we using this kind of laptop or these webcams, or whatever the case might be? Like, play up the good parts of your firm's technology to help make that a success.
Okay. Thank you, Kate. Gary, come to you.
I was thinking through some examples of a firm that's done it really well. And so I'll bring up another great example. In this case, it was an IT director. And what this firm did was some of the things that many of you do. They used the intranet to be able to have Q&A, things, to be able to continue to get feedback post-merger about things, and it was monitored regularly. They used that basically they had also this is to Kate's different styles of communication. They had a phone M&A hotline for those people that didn't want to do it on the intranet for whatever reason. They did a lot of exploration with their clients around client experience specifically related to the merger process. How's it going? What could we do better? They obviously couldn't do that to entire client populations, but I thought it was an interesting way of measuring that, because it not only helped them with the integration of what was ongoing, but really gave them important information for future mergers. And for the most part, firms that do one will do another one, will do another one, and that's part of the process and strategy. And then, of course, thinking about it from the standpoint of our people, I guess we'll call it a people experience. Getting feedback, regular task force or focus group specifically related to the merger and the ongoing process. This is cumulative and ongoing feedback process. The one thing that I so admire about our technologists as we get into the merger process is they really rally around solutions related to the merger. And then it's easy for us soon thereafter to take a deep breath and try to get back to all the other things that may have been shoved aside during the M&A process. And what I would say is, and don't stop there. Learn and keep that energy going, and continue to lead your team, lead the firm, lead everyone. And then in that context, there's no doubt that between the day we announced, then we actually integrate, and we keep on going, that we have a lot of issues that arise. And what I would say, borrowing a phrase that I've heard many times, is don't admire problems that exist, let's find solutions for them. It's easy for us to accumulate all the things that maybe aren't going as well and let those be parked, and we'll take care of those later. But I think it sends a tremendous message to not only our people, but also to future merger candidates when they come in and say, tell us about your last merger. How did integration go? How did you approach certain things? And when we can say to them, here's what we did, and oh, by the way, that was 6 months ago or 9 months ago or a year ago, and this is what we still have going on related to that. Jim, it gets back to your word culture from the beginning. It shows this culture that it's not about a transaction. We had something happen on June 1st. That's over. We've moved on. It's really about a culture that says we support. And so I think for us to be solutions oriented and to continue that process, however it works for your firm, getting information, thinking about solutions to whatever problems arise, staying on top of those things, not only makes this go well, but enables us for future activity.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think another point, and you kind of alluded to this, is just taking the time to celebrate the wins and the successes, because that question of tell me about your last merger, it's human nature, and it's easy to just go, I'm going to give you the laundry list of everything we didn't do right and everything that didn't go well, and now you're in a negative mindset. And so starting with what you did achieve, what you got right, what you're doing from the learnings, all of that impresses a positive culture on people that are coming in. So thank you, Gary. Bob, I'll go to you.
Sure. And quick example of that, that'll kind of swing back to is we do a weekly check-in, and thankfully the firms that we've just recently acquired both bring up the things that are going well and the things that are not going well. Anything that's technology wise, our goal is by the time we have the next weekly check-in, all of that's now in the going well bucket. So, we purposely ask what was negative from last week and ask about that thing this week, knowing that we've been on it, working on it, and making sure that they feel like we've been working on it too. So we've had we just acquired a firm running accounting CS, and it was taking them 4 hours what it used to take them to do 1 hour because the server conversion came over goofy. The night that we heard it, we moved that software package to a new server, and next morning they were good again. But it's that, as Gary said, it's the attack of the technology is used to of give me a problem, don't quell on it. What's the next step to go fix those as quick as possible? And a couple of the points from earlier that kind of came back up in here is some of the tactical things that we did as training, the upfront training. I heard Kate talk about it. They're so overwhelmed those first few days. One of the things we do is we split up the training days. I do not put them in a room for an entire day. You lose them by mid-morning. So what we do is we do an early on training day that hits on the easy stuff of almost everybody use Outlook. Here's our nuance to it. Here's, our security around email coming in, hitting those kind of lightweight things the first day. And then we wait until we usually give them an off day in between. And then the third day come in with practice management, workflow, some of that more heavy hitter stuff. And then what we do is, like I mentioned, we do the weekly check-in calls. So hours scheduled with their entire team. But that way is if something's coming up going, oh, we need to have workflow training again. We just slot it into that hour and everybody's already has that blocked off in their schedule. We don't use the whole thing, great. But if something comes up, we've already got that pre-planned time to go and attack that. And I like to that teaching them or showing them what you can do well for them. Like I said, the last couple of years, we do a lot of automation type stuff. And one of the neat ones is 8879 automation that we've taken that manual process. And as soon as that document is signed, we kick an automation off that releases the return, moves the job, drops the document in document management. Some of those, that's a lot of time off of these firms that traditionally, a lot of them we still acquire are still very paper heavy. So we talk about, yes, we're going to start moving you along to that paperless process, but then we hit on these efficiencies of, well, this is why. And then they hear about that and go, that's a lot of time. Yes, because a lot of times we're also trying to bring down, this group's contract hours. As we are a firm trying not to put 2,500 hours in. So we talk about this of, yes, your first year, we understand it's going to be brutal. There's a lot of change. We're here for you. But as we get through these and look at what's coming, we put those in place to help you guys out to get rid of those manual tasks and help automate things and make things efficient. So it's actually a lot of fun. I love being on that side of helping them along that process. And as soon as they get in the boat with you, it is so much more enjoyable and so much easier to implement this stuff of, again, acquiring the firms with the right culture, make a difference on both sides. And as soon as they start getting on board of like, all right, this makes sense. Again, it's that repetition follow-up. They don't retain everything. You can't expect them to. And you make sure that whole team that's wrapped around them is there for them to come back and keep moving them along.
All right, great. Thanks, Bob. I've got a couple questions here that have come in. So one was on the onboarding process of what's the difference between bringing in, say, a partner who has a book of business, so like a tuck-in versus bringing on a small firm with regard to planning and workload?
I'll jump in on this one. I would say that for the most part, you can become more client-centric in your onboarding, if you will, with a tuck-in partner, directed mid-partner, whatever terms we want to use, because it becomes more about what the client experience is related to technology, related to information exchange, related to how do we take that information then and be able to get system conversion. Is there a place where that's, if that individual is coming from another firm, as an example, do we have access or not have access to files? Or are we going to have to recreate something? Or is that partner coming in as a sole practitioner who we're going to convert the data over? So in general, we become more focused on the client experience and information exchange. Obviously, there's an element of making sure that the partner is up to speed on whatever our processes and technology can be, but the focus can be more heavily weighted toward client information.
Mm-hmm. Bob, you look like you were about to answer. Did you have something to add?
Yeah, and that's one of our recent ones was we acquired an office from another firm. So that exact scenario Gary was laying out, and it definitely changes the dynamic, especially in the technology wise. It is much easier of if we have our arms around all of it, that if you're acquiring an entire firm, pretty early on that process, you start just, it's going to be ours. It's probably ours. Here's how we're going to move forward and work with them, of course. But when you're tucking in an office, it's a whole, you don't have access to any of it. So you really have to work up front for, here's the timelines, here's what's coming over when, here's all the data, because, and then you got to stand up all new software because you're not getting their software with them. So between licensing and check-in points of, all right, here's when that stuff can start coming over the fence towards us. Because going live day one is much tougher in that circumstance because you're standing it all up for them versus being able to either keep their stuff running and transition it slowly or quickly. It's definitely, it's harder, absolutely doable, but there's way more planning and coordination because you've usually got to work with that other firm if it's a peel out situation. Just like I said, a ton more coordination up front and planning, or it turns into a scramble in a hurry.
Yep. I'm gonna do our last polling question here, and then I've got one more question for you all. So our third question is, if your firm has been involved in M&A, how would you rate the experience? So A is, while there's always room to improve, we've done a good job of planning and executing the onboarding of another firm. B, we do things, so A, C, or F. Some things well, but we stumble more than we should, or F, we're not following a process. So we'll give that a little time. You guys have all shared some really good insights of how to make it successful and the things to do. One of my biggest and best learnings from my entire career was in the early stages, because I got my start at Arthur Andersen, and I went over to KPMG Consulting, and I learned in one of the largest group hires on the consulting side, and I learned everything you don't want to do in an integration of a new team, separation of the two teams and cultures. And it was at the time, early in your career, it's tough, but if you are taking the right approach, you're paying attention, learning as you go, and filing that away for future reference of the ways you can do that much better. And many of the things you guys have shared would have helped immensely in that experience early in my career. So, all right, well, let's go ahead and share the result. Oh, we did. So 33% give it an A. Nobody's given it a C. 7% F, and we haven't been involved in M&A activity yet. That's 60% of the group. So many of you have not had the opportunity to enjoy the fun and good times of M&A. So here's my final question, and then we'll check in on our Q&A. And just a reminder, if you do have a question, pop it into the Q&A box, and we'll address that here before we close out, or we will get back to you after the conclusion. So final question, and Kate, I'm going to start with you. What's the one big thing that you'd like to ensure the audience takes away from our discussion today?
I would say that you're not in it alone, that if it sounds like this group that is here hasn't done this yet and has it in their future, there are people out there who can help you. There's advisors who can help you. There's firms like mine, like Netgain, that can help you through some of this, so that you are not, you're not learning the hard way every step of the way.
All right, thanks, Kate. Gary?
I would repeat, making yourself valuable beyond your current role, and being a strategic thought partner in a lot of aspects of your firm beyond technology. And then as you go through transactions, plan, communicate, and be solutions oriented.
Great. Bob?
Yeah, I piggybacking on Kate of find somebody else that's done it. If you've not done one before, there's a lot to learn. Once you learn it, it's easy to repurpose and run with it and learn from it and repackage that process and make it unique to each acquisition. But either find another firm that's done it that you're close with that you can talk to, or like Kate said, find somebody from the outside, because technology is so important anymore from the operations and staff's day to day that if it doesn't go well, their days don't go well. The feedback doesn't go well. It turns into negative conversations pretty quick. That's one of the reasons our whole team is dedicated to them, is as quick as we can get them back to working, they're not as unhappy. And they're working through that hard transition those first few weeks. So if you've not done it, you're doing your own due diligence on how to do it. Work with somebody else, peer network, external consultant, somebody, and you will probably thank us all for that recommendation after the fact, because you'll already know what pitfalls that you didn't have to jump into that you got past because of hearing it from somebody else.
Yeah. And I'll add mine. Is I would say it's a point we've made early and often throughout this discussion, but once again, involving we're specifically looking at the technology function, so your technology professionals, but I kept saying operations because you you need the holistic view as you properly plan and in order to execute. And to think that what's often a bunch of CPAs in the exec team know everything and have all the perspectives that are going to make this successful is not realistic. So engaging those people, before you're even needing to engage them, developing them as holistic leaders, which has been said many times, so that you build up that trust to where you're not worried about this is confidential, secret information. But the more you get them involved early, and they can be part of the solution and making a success, the better off you're going to be. So, Kate, I think I cut you off again. Did you have a point you were going to make?
Jim, always cutting me off.
Yeah, I'm sorry.
That's all right. I will just share that early in my career, I was at a Leading Edge Alliance meeting with a couple of fairly senior in the field CIOs. And this came up. It is such a wonderful place to get that kind of information. And I asked, as sort of a newbie, you all have done this a lot. Could you just give me a few tips on what I, as an IT professional, need to worry about or pay attention to or plan for? And the conversation that we had been having up to that moment stopped, and we spent the next 2 hours just laying out all the things to pay attention to. So just to reiterate what Bob was saying, there's a lot of folks out there who are willing to share their successes and help you avoid the failures that they've had.
Mm-hmm. Well, great advice from everyone. We have one more question in here. I do want to pop up our final slide and just again, all the panelists, and if our contact information is in the QR code. So if you want to reach out to any of us, feel free, just scan the QR code and you'll have our contact information. So the last question, just in the last few minutes here before we wrap up, and we kind of touched on this, but not fully directly, but what's the best way to prepare for a quick turnaround? We talked about how important that was to be ready, but any tips on how to prepare yourself for a quick, when you're not brought in early and often in the due diligence process? Bob?
Yeah, I can take a quick start. If you've done an acquisition before, it's the follow-up to, okay, what didn't go well? Add that to your documentation and put your playbook together of kind of each area. And I know we're tech heavy in this, but each area of the acquisition team should really have their playbook and their to-dos ready to roll over for the next one. We simply use Planner from Microsoft, and we can roll that over, change the nuances to this firm, add their software, make those changes. But the big ticket items are there that you don't have to rethink about. And then once you quickly, especially if you get 2 weeks or less to work on it, you can just stick in the things that are new or nuanced to that acquisition. And if you haven't done one before, do what we're telling you. Go meet with those other firms and start putting that playbook together beforehand. It'll really help you move that needle quick and take a lot of the thought out of it, of the bigger items, but then you can start tactically worrying about what the nuances are.
Mm-hmm. Thanks, Bob. Gary, Kate, anything from either of you?
I think where Bob was going and where Kate went on her prior comments is the right place. Our profession is such a collegial profession. The opportunity to borrow from the experiences of others, if you're put in a quick turnaround situation where you may not have had the experience, there's a lot of organizations like Kate's, Jim, your organization, others that can help from an outside consulting standpoint. And we have some fantastic colleagues through alliances and networks that will jump in. So never be ashamed of either paying for help or asking for help either. It's making the main thing the main thing. We need to get this merger done and we need to integrate it well, and we'll learn lessons from that and make the next one better.
All right. Thanks, Gary. Well, we are approaching the top of the hour, so I just want to say thank you again to Netgain for sponsoring today's webinar. And thank you, Bob, Gary, Kate. Great insights, and appreciate you sharing your experiences and expertise on the role of IT in the M&A process. And then finally, a thank you to everyone out there for joining us today. We look forward to seeing you on a future Boomer Consulting webinar. Have a great rest of your day.